Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Beatles Forever. In our last episode, Mal was hoping to find some free love in Sweden. Instead, he found it back home with the Beatle fans who wanted to get close to the Beatles, but they had to get to know Mal first, and he knew it. Next, he was told by Brian to stop looking so scruffy. Mal didn't like that because he felt that Brian was jealous of him, and it was because he was liked by so many people. Mal longed for the limelight, and he didn't mind getting into photos with the Beatles, even though Neil and Tony and Mal had made a pact to stay out of the pictures because the fans only wanted to see the Beatles in them. Then Mal had to be in the hospital when bad weather caused him to crash and destroy the Beatles' van. The Beatles moved up to a limo ride after their shows in order to get out before the fans could grab them. Mal had the duty of taking away people who were physically impaired if there were too many of them gathering backstage. Their caretakers would wander away for a cup of tea and leave them back there in the dressing room. Then we find out from George that Mal had a bag that he had built up through the years, and he was able to provide anyone with whatever they asked for. George said that Mal loved his job and loved to be of service to people. So let's see what's going on today. January, Brian had booked the Beatles for an 18-day stay at Paris's Olympia Theater. They headlined a 9-act bill, often performing multiple sets per day. The Paris residency was a rare opportunity for Lily and Gary to enjoy an extended visit with Mal. Lily remembered Mal was told he could take me and the baby with him. It was very nice, but we were repaying Epstein the cost of our fares and hotels for months. January 14th, the Beatles took the flight from London to Paris. Mal accompanied the band's gear by train to the Olympia, and Mal and his family stayed at the elegant Hotel George V during the Beatles' stay there. The hotel was only a few minutes from the Champs-Élysées, and Lily was looking forward to doing some sightseeing. Before the Paris run, Mal prepared the band's equipment to get it ready for the Beatles' arrival. Mal said, "One of the beauties of being a road manager is that you're always there first at any show. Everybody in the place knew me, police, security guards, and the management personnel. And this enabled me to travel in and out of the theaters at will. Mal was cautious about Brian. He didn't want any more conflicts with him. When Brian first got to the Olympia to see the show, Mal said no one would believe that he was the Beatles' manager, thinking that if you're going to come up with a tall story, that's one of the best. Eventually, he managed to get word to me, and I came to the stage door and vouched for him. He was fuming, and I know that really got him uptight." The stay there started in an unforgettable way for Mal and Neil, who found themselves involved in a backstage riot on the very first night at the Olympia. Lucky for them, Bill Corbett, the 250-pound chauffeur, was with them on the trip. Mal recalled later he had impressed us with the fact that, 1, he could speak fluent French, and 2, he had been a courier on the continent for several years, knowing the streets of Paris like the back of his hand. On the afternoon of January the 16th is when everything went bad. It started when the band's press manager, Brian Somerville, failed to arrange for a pre-show press conference. Somerville was known as Pinklebone, and he had irritated the local press with reporters and photographers waiting for more than 2 hours to press the flesh with Vartan in particular. To make matters worse, Somerville tried to lay the blame on the ruckus at George Harrison's feet. At first, the French journalists had been in good mood when they arrived at the Olympia. Having just returned from reporting on the Pope's visit to the Holy Land, they amused themselves by wearing novelty beetle wigs. But then they got hard to control, and as Mal looked on in horror, the French press corps forced their way backstage, determined to make their deadlines. The Beatles made a hasty retreat to the curtain part of the dressing room, and Mal said the Beatles were heard shouting from behind the safety of the curtains, "Go get 'em, Mal, throw 'em out." So Mal responded by lifting the wayward journalists and hurling them through the dressing room door. Corbett acted as his eager second, and Mal emptied the dressing room, hitting one of the photographers during the scuffle. In the meantime, George threw a glass of orange juice at Pinklebone, furious over the press officer's short-sightedness in managing the journalist. Mal wrote, "Eventually, calm was restored to the backstage area, and this was the only fight I got involved with on behalf of the Beatles." Mal's son Gary got his most pleasant earliest memories. He remembered as a toddler watching one of the concerts from the wings with his mother. He said, "I used to get very animated when they sang From Me to You," Gary recalled, "and I can remember being at the side of the stage, looking at the band and trying to wrestle my way out of my mom's arms and run towards them." On the night of January 17th, when Mal and the Beatles returned from their latest Olympia gig, Brian Epstein rushed into the band's suite, clutching a telegram from Capitol Records, and announced that I Want to Hold Your Hand was on the top of the American charts. The Beatles were so thrilled they took turns climbing onto Mal's back, with the big man parading them around the room. Mal said they went mad. They always act this way when anything big happens, just a bunch of kids jumping up and down with sheer delight. Paul climbed on my back, demanding a piggyback. They felt that this was the biggest thing that could have happened. Gradually, they quieted down, ordered some more drinks, and sat down to appreciate fully what had happened. It was a wonderful, marvelous night for them. I was knocked out. Mal was happy when Brian threw an unforgettable celebration that night at George V, with George Martin and his girlfriend Judy Lockhart Smith on hand for the occasion. So George Martin was in town to supervise the band's German language recordings of She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand at EMI's Path Marconi Studios. The festivities that evening included dinner at the gourmet restaurant Mouton de Panurge, and Brian playfully wore a chamber pot on his head as the Beatles and their entourage toasted their good fortune. The celebration continued back at the George V, with Brian throwing a party with the Beatles. George and Judy were there in the next room, and a couple of newspaper friends put on a private show involving several prostitutes for our entertainment, one of them being very pregnant. Mal remembered it was a little unnerving to have these ladies performing before our eyes with each other in one room, and Brian, George Martin, and Judy, and a rather staid members of the press in the adjoining living room. I guess celebration caters to everybody's different taste, and the party lasted until 5 o'clock the next morning. And that day, Mal saw Lily and Gary off at the airport for their return flight. The Beatles had a few more gigs at the Olympia, including a February 1st show where Paul nearly missed his cue, having become enchanted with a woman backstage. The curtain was about to go up, and Neil nervously strapped on Paul's Hofner bass and took his place on stage. At the last moment, Paul leapt into action, but Neil had been ready to make a go of it, and he later wrote in Mal's diary that he had been quite prepared to fake it. The Paris residency ended on February the 4th. Mal wrote, "Last show, nothing happened." When Mal returned to London with the equipment on February the 5th, the Beatles were scheduled to perform yet another hasty turnaround. That Friday, February the 7th, they were booked to make their maiden voyage to America. Back in November, Brian had arranged for the Beatles to perform on CBS Television's Ed Sullivan Show on consecutive weekends. This allowed the Beatles the opportunity to play in front of a massive TV audience. When Brian struck the deal, the Beatles were relatively unknown stateside, but now with a slew of Beatles songs making their way up the charts, the magnitude of their upcoming American visit was beginning to take on unforeseen proportions. To prepare for the Beatles' maiden voyage to the States, Mal spent Thursday, February the 6th, 1964, roaming the London music stores. He went to Hesse's and several vendors in the capital. In the early 1960s, Ivor Arbiter had opened a pair of music stores that caters to a pair of the music trade, including Drum City on Shaftesbury Avenue and Sound City, which specialized in guitars and amps, on Rupert Street. And Drum City was ground zero for Ludwig equipment. Mal wrote, "I was busy getting drums and cymbal cases, covers for the amplifiers and speakers, generally getting all my spare equipment together, such as plectrums, spare guitar leads, drumsticks, as well as Hack's cough drops and the jars of honey that the band used to ease their sore throats after long nights of singing on the road." Drum City loomed large in Ringo's legend. Back in April 1963, Arbiter, at Brian's request, had designed the Beatles' Drop T logo with its exaggerated capital B for the front skin of Ringo's Ludwig bass drum. Mal never forgot the flight to New York City. It was the longest in his life at that moment. He and Neil sat in coach, and they had anticipation and were nervous about what was waiting for them on the ground at John F. Kennedy International Airport, recently rechristened in honor of the fallen president. When they arrived, they were surprised by 3,000 fans that had gathered to greet the band at JFK. American Beatlemania had truly been born. Mal said, "We were staying at the Plaza Hotel, and I'm sure the Palm Court had never witnessed such hysteria, being absolutely besieged by fans, with the whole New York police force guarding us." The next day, the Beatles rehearsed in advance of their first appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show. George was sick with the flu. Neil took his place on stage. On Sunday, February the 9th, the day of the broadcast, the band received a telegram of congratulations from Elvis and Colonel Tom Parker. Paul couldn't help ribbing Mal, saying, "You're his biggest fan, Mal. How come you didn't get a good luck telegram?" As the roadie looked on, the whole episode ended up with the boys fighting about who was going to keep it as a souvenir. George recovered in time for the broadcast, but as showtime approached, Mal realized about a half hour before the show was due to go live that Ringo's drum head with the Beatles' signature logo was nowhere to be seen. Mal wrote that with only minutes to go before the show was to be seen for the first time live in America, the whole front of the bass drum loomed large and empty as a railway tunnel. I had forgotten to replace the drum skin with their name on it. I stood rooted to the spot, having wet myself with fright, but with minutes to spare, I managed to restore that famous name for the waiting millions of fans to see. That night, 73 million viewers watched the Beatles perform on Ed Sullivan's show. It eclipsed the hysteria at the Palladium the previous October, and it was a turning point, ushering in a British invasion that would swiftly reshape the pop music landscape. February 11th, they made their American concert debut at Washington, D.C. Coliseum. For Mal, it would be one of the strangest gigs in the group's history, an instance where things went wrong on a grand scale. At first, it was a little matter of the microphones, and Mal got it fixed in a short time. There was an onslaught of jelly babies, and they were even more dangerous because in the United States there were jelly beans, the candy's first cousin, and it stung more when you got hit by one of them. To accommodate their performance, the stage had been set up in the round, and this allowed the band to play while facing different quadrants to the venue. In the center of it all was Ringo's drum kit, which had been secured to a revolving electrical rostrum. The contraption worked during the rehearsals, Mal said, but wouldn't you know it, when it came time for the actual show, the thing refused to move, and I ended up jumping on stage every couple of numbers and manhandling it to its new position. That night, they attended a reception at the British Embassy. There were 300 elite guests there. It was a benefit supporting the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, the favorite British charity of Lady Ormsby Gore. The upper class turned up their noses at the Beatles, and a British debutante got behind Ringo and cut off a lock of his hair as a souvenir. Oh, what a nerve. So the Beatles demanded to leave, and the group left feeling humiliated, according to the photographer that was with them that night. They were very sad and looked as if they wanted to cry, John in particular. The Beatles disapproved at Brian for accepting the invitation in the first place, and insisted that they never again be made to submit themselves to such degradation. As they made their way back to New York City for a pair of concerts at Carnegie Hall, Mal got a white Stetson cowboy hat from the American truckers who had assisted him in transporting the group's equipment. It brought back his love for the Old West. After the Carnegie Hall concerts, the boys and their entourage flew to Miami, where the band was slated to perform again on the Ed Sullivan Show, which was to be broadcast from Deauville Beach Resort Sunday, February 16th. Mal once more found tension moments before airtime. The previous act concluded their slot, and Sullivan stepped in front of the curtain to talk to the audience, and CBS ran the usual series of television advertisements. As the seconds ticked away, Mal recalled there was no sign of the Beatles. Ed Sullivan was mad and stuck his head through the curtain, saying, "Mal, where the F are they? Where are the Beatles?" The roadie later learned that Neil and the band had been detained by fans in the crowded hotel. Ed Sullivan was at the point of putting on a standby act when the Beatles appeared and were on stage with seconds to spare. Mal wrote, in fact, as the last advertisement was running out. With hardly time to tune up, the curtain opened and the show went on. It's at moments like these that fate must sit in the wings with a devilish grin on her face, watching the antics of us poor humans. By Monday evening, Mal would be on a plane ferrying the Beatles' equipment back to London, while the boys stayed behind for a much-needed rest. And that Tuesday, Mal missed the opportunity to join them, as they pretended to spar with 22-year-old Cassius Clay, who was soon to be known as Muhammad Ali, the heavyweight boxer. He was in training in preparation for his upcoming title bout with Sonny Liston. The American experience was a dream come true for the roadie. Mal said, "I was to find myself at the center of attention on many occasions, and I must admit I enjoyed every bit of it. Standing on the beach with a crowd of blue-haired old ladies clamoring for my autograph was the show business I wanted to be a part of." At the same time, he was appalled by the cultural differences he encountered. The American attitude was also foreign to our nature, he observed, and they were to laugh at our pleases, thank yous, and excuse me's, which we were used to saying. We found Americans to be rude from our point of view when they would demand things not only from us, but from each other without saying please, but feel that America is our sister and that we speak the same language and share the same differences. Mal was back to Liverpool on Friday, where he was reunited, if only briefly, with Lily and Gary. After writing in his diary that it was wonderful to be home, Mal was back in London with the Beatles by Sunday night, where he was stunned to meet the Avengers stars Patrick Macnee and Diana Rigg during the taping of the band's appearance on the TV talk show Big Night Out at Teddington Studios. The next day, Mal was due in court on charges from his wreck in November with the Ford van. He was represented by NIMS attorney Rex Macon. He had been charged with driving without proper insurance, given the policy attached to the car specified only John, George, Ringo, and Neil as permissible drivers, even though John wouldn't obtain a driver's license until February 1965. The case was ultimately dismissed when NIMS insurance carrier assured the court that could have provided coverage for the roadie. For Mal's part, his anxiety was at a fever pitch. He was fearful he might yet again raise Brian's anger and potentially lose his job. Mal tried to be good on his promise to correspond with Lil, but he didn't manage to get a letter written until March 3rd. He was on the film set at Minehead Station in Somerset and other locations with the group in Dick Lester, and was for the film A Hard Day's Night. He wrote to her, "I used to love writing letters. I found it quite easy, but I guess lack of practice is making it hard. I'm certainly going to write regularly in the future, darling, for I have not been fair to you in the past." He closed the letter, "I love this job, as you know, Lil, but when I hear Gary on the phone, like tonight, it really breaks me up, and I want to be with you all the time. This won't be for always, doll, and we will be together once again." So I will end the video here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you haven't subscribed, if you could do so, it would help the channel to grow, as well as giving it a thumbs up. It's all a great help. And if you haven't clicked on the notification bell, if you could do that, it lets you know when a video is posted. And I want to wish everybody a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of The Beatles Forever. Thank you. Bye.